Hey everyone, so it's Hearth and welcome back to my channel. So on today's video, we're going to be doing part 2 of the October Q&A. Now I know, I just did the November Q&A, so why am I doing the October Q&A now? Well, if you weren't there for the disaster of the October Q&A, my internet essentially died about 6 times, and I did 6 different versions of the October Q&A, and I could not for the life of me get the Q&A to actually work. So I asked you guys your questions over on Instagram, and now I'm finally getting around to answering them. Yes, it has been an extensive period of time and I do apologise, but as you can tell, between part 1 and part 2, my hair is a different colour and we completely painted the room. So things have been happening between then and now. So hopefully you will have seen part 1. If you haven't already seen part 1, I will link it up here and it will also be down in the description box. I would recommend checking out part 1 because obviously part 1, as Stephanie Hollow says, comes before part 2. And she's very right there. Part 1 does come before part 2. But obviously you don't have to. And I also have all of my other live streams, well at least quite a lot of them available so that you can watch them. They're very long, so if this is the first Q&A you've ever been to, this is the shortest Q&A I will ever do. So let's get on with the questions. So the first question is all about cleansing a space. What do you say? Do you need to say anything? Can you not say anything at all? Now I think the topic of cleansing has become a little bit more complicated since Instagram and TikTok kind of took over when it came to social media witchcraft. And the issue with this is that these platforms are very visual, and so oftentimes cleansings become a lot more intricate when you have a camera put on you. This is also the case when you see documentaries about witchcraft. You'll often find that the people within the documentaries will kind of amp up the way they look, the way they speak, and the way they act for the camera in order to make it appear a little bit more mystical to those watching. So you don't have to say anything when you're cleansing an item. Now it really all depends on the magical practitioner. Some people will definitely say things such as, I cleanse away the negative energies of this item so that I may use it for the betterment of myself and others. But of course you can say absolutely nothing at all. I know that when I'm cleansing I typically don't say anything, usually because I'm focusing on not burning myself and also not dropping ash anywhere. I am a very clumsy person, so for me all of my concentration is on not hurting myself. But for other people they might choose to use words or use phrases, chants, repetition. It really all depends on the magical practitioner. Now the next one is, have you ever had any out-of-body experiences? Now I definitely have. I used to astral project when I was younger, and it was actually one of the first things within witchcraft that I looked into because I was like, what is this? What am I doing? How do I make it stop? What is happening? So I never used to astral project to the astral plane. Instead, it was much more like an out-of-body experience where I would just not be in my own body and could just wander around and watch TV, which was quite fun when I was a child, honestly. That was very entertaining. I've never had any out-of-body experiences outside of what I would consider to be astral projection, and to this day, I still don't purposefully astral project. Honestly, I prefer to keep my feet firmly on the ground. That is my safe space. My safe space is not astral projecting, preferably. So next up we have, what are the potential dangers of practicing witchcraft, or what kind of things can go wrong? Now, the amount of things that can go wrong really entirely depends on an individual practitioner and what kind of practices they're doing. Of course, there's going to be some practices that are more dangerous than others, a little bit like how some jobs are more hazardous than others. So if you are, say, a kitchen witch that just works with food and cooking, the only real hazards that you're going to experience are maybe setting off the smoke alarm, having a bad meal that you don't really like, or burning yourself potentially. But if you work more with spirits and summonings, whether that's fae, general human spirits, demons, angels, those kind of things, there can be more hazards with that, especially if you are working with more advanced beings. So those that work with more higher level demons, higher level spirits, are more likely going to have dangers in their magical practice than someone that's, say, a green witch. But of course it entirely depends on the magical practice of the person. So you can have everything from having a paper cut from writing in your Book of Shadows to accidentally setting something on fire in the kitchen, all the way up to kind of spirit attachment, sometimes possession in very extreme circumstances, spell backfire, negative energies, those kind of things. But obviously where a practitioner is going to fall on the spectrum of not that bad to really quite bad really depends on how experienced they are, how good they are at dealing with negative situations, as well as their type of practice. So this is why myself and many others do not recommend anyone jump into spell work and ritual without knowing how to get themselves out of a tricky situation. If you know how to protect yourself and if you know how to get yourself out of bad situations, getting yourself into a little bit more hot water isn't quite as much of an issue. Of course, always do everything safely, but if you know how to get out of it, you're then kind of moving yourself further down the scale because you are capable of figuring your own way out rather than being stuck with, say, spirit attachment without knowing how to get rid of it. So it's definitely nothing to be really, really scared of as long as you do your research and you know what you're getting into. So the next one is, what do you do with petitions that have been completed? So this I'm going to classify as being any piece of paper that is used within spellwork and ritual. Typically, papers are used within spellwork to write down your desired intention. They're often added into small pouches. They might be carried as little kind of charms around with you. They might be added into necklaces or pieces of jewelry to add extra intention in. But what do you do with them after you've done that working? Well, there's a few different options. Some people will choose to use either cleansing fire or energizing fire. Now, oftentimes, the way these two different techniques are used is during different moon phases. So during the waxing phase of the moon, you might be classifying that as energizing fire. Whereas during the waning period of the moon, it is cleansing fire. So if you want to give one final push to that working, so say, for instance, you've done a prosperity working and the working has kind of come to an end and you just want to give it a little bit of a push at the very end, you can use the waxing phase of the moon and burn that petition and give it a little bit more energy as it's going. On the other side, if you want to stop a working and you've taken it all apart and you just want to dispose of everything without energizing it any further, you can use cleansing fire during the waning phase of the moon just to really clear out any of that energy. Other options are washing it away. Now, paper, if it is paper, is dissolvable and it will degrade really, really quickly. So you can do this by sitting it in a glass of water or just like a dish of water for a few days, and then you can return it back to the earth, or you can drain the water away and kind of tip it into the bin. Another option is to bury it, because with the moisture in the soil and all of the animals within it, it will break down really, really quickly. But it all depends on kind of the type of materials that you've used. If you've used a really toxic ink, like a marker pen or something like that, you might not want to, say, put it in the earth or dissolve it, depending on your location. Whereas if you've used something like pencil, then it is pretty okay just to kind of bury it in the ground. So there's a few different options there. It really all depends on what kind of you want to get out of it, and depending on the intention of the working. So some workings and some petitions and papers are going to require different kind of end goals to get rid of them than others. So next up we have, how do you overcome your fear of backfire in spell work? Now, I do have a full video on spell backfire and how to avoid it. Now, in this video I talk a lot about what causes spell backfire, and then to figure out what to avoid doing, you just look at everything the opposite way. You flip it all round. So when it comes to dealing with backfire, it's really important to acknowledge why it happens. And once you know why spells backfire, you can then do the opposite. You can work around it. So a lot of the time spells will backfire if they're aimed at a person. People often have protections around them, even if they aren't magical practitioners themselves. They may have guides, they may have spirits, they may have ancestors that are helping to protect them, even though they themselves aren't aware that they need spiritual protection. So you're more likely going to have backfire by interacting with a person. So instead, you work on their environment. So even if you're trying to do something positive for that person, if the spirits don't want any energy interfering with the person themselves and it's going to cause a backfire, you can instead do something positive in the life of the person. So instead of doing a working for abundance on them, instead, you try to maybe bring better jobs into their area, so then they're more likely going to earn more money, or you try to work with the company and the energy of the company to be more willing and to be in a better position to give this person a raise so that they then have more prosperity in the form of finance. those kind of things. So there's lots and lots of options. That full video I will link up here and I'll put it down in the description box as well, because I often find that the word backfire carries a lot of weight, and most of the time people don't necessarily know what backfire equates to. What does it mean? How severe is it? And I think once you take away the stigma from the term, once you know what it means and you know how to avoid it, then you no longer have the same fear of it. And if it does happen, you know how to get yourself out of it. So just like with working with spirits, when it comes to spell work and ritual, I always recommend having more knowledge than you need before going in. That way you know how to stop things like spell backfire and those kind of things. So another really common question is, can you still make moon water if the moon isn't visible in the sky? So anything from new moon water to full moon water, first quarter, third quarter, those kind of things. Can you make them if the container isn't visible to the moonlight, if you can't physically see the moon? And the answer to that is very brief. Yes, and that's because the moon's influence on the earth doesn't change if there's clouds in the sky. So the tides will still flow back and forth despite the moon being covered by the clouds, because the energy of the moon and the gravitational pull of the moon isn't interrupted by the presence of the clouds. The same works for the energy, so it's about the energy of the time. I know that a lot of people think that they can't do moon water, whether that be full moon water, new moon water, blue moon water, if the sky is full of clouds and they can't see the moon, but you definitely can, because that energy is all around anyway. So you'll often find that during a full moon, you'll often feel the energy of the full moon even during the middle of the day when the moon isn't visible in the sky. So you can definitely still work with lunar energy even if the moon isn't visible, whether that's because it's covered in clouds or it's too early in the day. You can definitely work with lunar energy. If you can, it is always good to get water especially out in the direct moonlight, but it definitely isn't a requirement. Indoor windowsills are fine, outside is fine, even if it is cloudy. Just try to bring it in before the sun comes up, or you're going to kind of interfere with the energy a little bit. But other than that, you can definitely make moon water even if you can't visibly see the moon. And this is especially true during the dark moon period, because during the dark moon phase, you can basically not see the moon anyway because it's in its dark moon phase. So definitely, you can still do it. I have a full video, by the way, on making moon water. I will link it up here and down in the description box for more information about all that good stuff. Up next, we have a question all about protection spells. This one is, how long does it take for protection spells to work and how long do they last? So the answer to this entirely depends on what kind of protection working you've done. Some protections are longer lasting than others. Some are quicker to manifest than others. It really entirely depends on what you're doing. So protection workings can vary, everything from protection sigils that you maybe draw on yourself or maybe you burn, which usually manifest very, very quickly, but often dissipate within just a few hours. The energy of these kind of workings is very minimal, and oftentimes the saying, you get out what you put in, is very true when it comes to spell work. Spell work that requires very, very little energy and effort often doesn't last for particularly long, and it won't have exceptionally strong results. So something like a sigil might manifest instantly, but it's also going to dissipate in a few hours. Now, there are several different kind of varieties of protection working. So you have the very, very short term, like the sigils. You then have charms and the like, which are often created items or general symbols of power that are embodied with energy. These can often last long term as long as you're maintaining that energy. Now, when it comes to shields, I have just done a video on shields. Once again, I'll link it up here and down in the description box. You get how this is going now. There's a lot of videos that I've done that I'm going to reference in this video. Now, shields are often very, very temporary. They take a lot of energy and they have to be constantly maintained. So they will only stay present and active for as long as you are maintaining the energy. Then you have much larger wards. These are often powered by almost batteries, energy batteries. They often have items of power used within them that they essentially draw from as an energy source. Now, they often manifest very quickly and they will dissipate kind of slowly over time as their energetic battery kind of runs out, and then you will have to recharge or redo them again. Of all the workings that you can do, protection workings are some of the quickest to manifest, because instead of trying to draw something to you, you're essentially putting up shields and barriers to stop things interfering with with you. So for instance, if you do a job spell, but you aren't interested in getting a job, it's going to take a very, very long time to manifest, if it manifests at all, because you're after something that you aren't actively looking for. Whereas with a protection working, it's often energetic, spiritual protection, and that is often very, very quick to manifest because it's you wanting to achieve something that's very easy to achieve as long as you know what you're doing and you know how to go about it. I have one that is very unusual, and I felt like I should kind of mention it because I think there's a lot of people that have misconceptions about witches. This one is, do you drink blood? Think you might be confusing like vampires with witches here, even in a fantasy sense. No, witches do not drink blood as a general answer. I suppose there might be people that choose to do that, but that isn't necessarily something that is a witch-specific thing, if that makes any sense. So there may well be some witches that choose to do that, but that's not witches in general. So very, very quick breakdown is that a witch is no different than anyone else. Witches aren't a different species. We don't suddenly develop powers at the age of 16 when we have our 16th birthday party and miraculously gain powers. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what witchcraft and witches are. And I think that largely comes down to misconceptions in TV shows and movies. So witches are human. We are just like everyone else, but we have studied a craft, witchcraft. So to be a witch is to study and practice witchcraft. Now, it's something that you learn and develop. There are people that are born into witch families, which don't necessarily have anything better going for them than someone that's brand new to witchcraft, although they are often taught by their family. So they often have kind of a step up from everyone else because they don't have to kind of sift through a bunch of misinformation first. They get accurate information from the people who've practiced it before them, whereas a lot of people kind of have to start from square one and kind of work from the ground up. So we aren't some different species. We eat food just like everyone else. This was another question I had a lot is, what do witches eat? Do witches eat special food? Witches just eat food like anyone else. We don't drink blood as of a general subject, at least no witch that I know drinks blood, but obviously there might be some out there that do choose to incorporate that into their diet. Some people are vegan, some are vegetarian, some are pescatarian, some just eat bog standard food, some people eat McDonald's, some people cook for themselves, the list goes on. Whatever you can think of doing as a normal person, a witch would typically choose to live that way depending on who they are. So no blood drinking. No. I have a music question here that I actually really, really like. This one is, are there any songs or artists that you like to listen to before, during, and after rituals? Now, I actually have a full playlist of my favourite witchy and pagan songs. I'll list it down below in the description box, but it is just generally available in my playlist section on the channel. And it's basically just every artist that I really, really like and that I listen to. Now, typically I don't listen to music during rituals because I have a really short attention span. And because I've listened to these songs so much, I often know all of the lyrics. So the moment Damn the Bard, Cauldron Born comes on, you know that I'm jamming to that. Even if I'm in the middle of some divination, you know that I am singing along to that song. And so I have to kind of limit it. Often I'll listen to these songs when I'm writing my Book of Shadows, when I'm doing tarot readings, when I'm reading. Oftentimes I will have kind of pagan music on in the background while I'm doing research. I often don't really listen to it during rituals, but that's just kind of because I can focus on like one thing at a time. I am like that dog, squirrel. That is me with everything. The moment something vaguely interesting happens outside of what I'm doing, that is me gone. I am distracted. It's a miracle I even finished education. So for me, I don't listen to it during ritual, but I do listen to it before and after, and the playlist is really good. I actually need to add some more things to it because I found some new fantastic artists that definitely deserve some recognition, so I'll be updating that soon. Now we have one on jars versus bags. What are your thoughts on using jars, bags, or other containers to enhance workings? So when it comes to this, I like using them for different reasons, and I have found recently that there have been a lot of posts, specifically on TikTok, definitely on TikTok, and some on Instagram as well, that really push the idea of using jars for absolutely everything, and sometimes people miss the point of using a jar. A little bit. I like using jars and bags and jewelry like lockets to hold onto magical items and energies, but I use them very specifically for what I need. So oftentimes you will use jars if you want to contain energy. So for instance, if you are doing a working where you want to keep money around, so you want to keep it in your possession so that people aren't constantly asking you for money, so that you are maintaining your spending a little bit more, I'll often use a jar because it acts as a container where nothing can get into it and nothing can leave. So it's trapping that energy inside that jar. Whereas if you're doing a banishing spell, you're not really going to want to use a jar necessarily. I mean, there are ways to use a jar with banishing spells. The action of kind of throwing away and breaking that jar can be very symbolic within witchcraft. But if you're having a jar sitting around, having a banishing jar doesn't necessarily line up with what you want, because you want that person out of your life. You want them gone. You want that energy gone, but you're keeping it in a jar in your bedroom, keeping it around. Like, to me, that doesn't make much sense. Of course, every practitioner and every tradition is going to be different. But for me, I find that I will use jars for certain intentions. I will use bags for other intentions. Oftentimes, if I want to carry the energy around with me, I will often use bags because they're very portable. Of course, pandemic, we're not really going that many places. But if I was to be going anywhere, I do like having spell bags and spell pouches in my, I would say bag, but it's not really a bag. It's kind of it's not a fanny pack. It's like a leg bag thing. That is a terrible description, but I'll often like keep them in there so that I'm carrying them around with me, so that energy is kind of staying with me all of the time. And then when it comes to things like lockets, I don't have it on at the minute, but I do have a locket that I use for spell work, and I'll often put items of protection in there. I know that when I was doing exams, in the locket I would often put herbs that would help me study, so there'd often be rosemary in there. I think I used to add vervain in at one point. I think that was for good fortune. I think I wanted kind of good fortune and study, and I would keep it in this locket and I'd carry it around. And that was a very kind of temporary container for spellwork and ritual, that after I'd finished my exams, I would thank the herbs and I would kind of release them back to the earth again. And that's kind of how I would do that. So I do like using these kind of containers, but I definitely don't use them as frequently as a lot of other practitioners, and I have noticed that especially TikTok uses containers a lot more in their magical practice, and I'm not sure if maybe it's because when you're using physical items, you can obviously record it for a TikTok, whereas if you're just using energy, you can't really record that because no one can really see what you're doing. So I suppose it makes sense that TikTok is kind of overwhelmingly item-based, but it does lead a lot of people, I think, to overuse items and maybe neglect energy work because it's something that they aren't seeing on social media, which I think is a massive shame, because as much as I love doing a good old jar spell, I definitely don't do them as often as I think people would expect me to. So I got a lot of questions about the broom closet and tips for making their way out of it. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, the broom closet is a term that's been used for a very long time to essentially define a hidden version of practice. So maybe a person can't openly share their magical practice or their spirituality or their religion with other people because they aren't necessarily going to be accepting of it, because they have opposing beliefs and religions, and they just generally feel very uncomfortable, and so they keep their magical practice entirely personal and to themselves. Now, coming out of this kind of hidden state can be really, really difficult, and it entirely depends on your own personal situation as to how you do it. Oftentimes, it is younger people, teenagers, that want to share their journey with their family and specifically their parents, and they're not really sure how to do it. Now, I was very, very lucky in that when I personally kind of stepped out of this hidden stage of my magical practice, it wasn't like a huge deal because I was weird anyway. I think my parents already thought that I was just a little bit odd. And they were right. I am incredibly odd. But I'm lucky that when I did it, it wasn't such a huge deal. But for other people, it can be a really big decision that they have to make. So I'd recommend the first thing is to gauge whether or not the people that you're going to be telling are accepting of it. What religion do they have? Do they have any opinions, say, on witchcraft TV shows? Have they ever watched any witchcraft documentaries? Would they be willing to watch any witchcraft documentaries? Ronald Hutton. Thank me later. Ronald Hutton is a fantastic historian. He mainly focuses on occult history and he's done a lot of work within Wicca, witchcraft, the witch trials, different periods of witchcraft around the world. Phenomenal presenter, phenomenal author. He's just awesome. I've been lucky enough to go and see him speak and I would thoroughly recommend it. But if you're doing this kind of preemptive research, if your family is pretty accepting, or the people that you're going to be sharing this with are pretty accepting of other religions, maybe they're agnostic in nature, then that's a really good first step because they're already more likely going to be accepting of it. If they are willing to watch witchcraft documentaries, witchcraft TV shows, even better, because that already means that they have kind of an idea, though probably not the correct idea, of what witchcraft is, and that is a lot easier. Now, unfortunately, there are a lot of people that live in families that are exceptionally opposed to witchcraft. I have even met people whose families won't even allow them to watch Sabrina the Teenage Witch because they think that it's the devil's work. So in those kind of situations, I'd say it's really important to put your own emotional, psychological, and physical safety first. I know that it can be really difficult to be in this hidden environment and to have to keep part of yourself a secret, but if it's going to put you under even more stress, if it's going to risk having a real big argument and a disagreement, and especially if you are a minor, it might be a case in this situation of waiting until you are legally allowed to believe what you want, do what you want, and of legal age, because I never want to see anyone in an even worse situation coming out of this hidden place than they were in before. So I think it's really important that if you are a minor, if you are still living with family members, friends that maybe aren't accepting, there will come a time when you're able to openly practice and it won't be a problem anymore. I know that it can feel like the end of the world, but I can promise it definitely won't be. And at some point in your life, probably sooner than you think, you will be able to openly express who you are. If your family, friends, whoever it is that you want to share this with is pretty open about it, but maybe they have misconceptions. So maybe they will accept watching documentaries about witchcraft, but they're a little bit concerned because they're not quite sure what it is and what it involves. You'll often find that people are very cautious of witchcraft because they don't entirely know what it is. A lot of fear is caused by misunderstanding or the lack of understanding of what it actually entails. So I would say if you are kind of dropping it into conversation and they maybe bring up the fact that they're concerned because they think it's to do with Satan, or they think that it's evil, they think it's a cult, those kind of things, the very common misconceptions that you find, especially with parents. Parents, their main job is to take care of you and to keep you safe. And oftentimes they will be exceptionally cautious of anything they don't understand. So bring educational media, whether that be a documentary, whether that be an informative book, a blog article, a YouTube channel. I am actually in the process of making a video specifically for this purpose. I don't know if anyone would be interested, but just kind of breaking down some of the misconceptions that a lot of, especially parents and concerned individuals, might have for when it comes to witchcraft. But bring that informative media, because a lot of the time what people are scared of is not actually what witchcraft is, and that's what a lot of the problems kind of go down to. They boil down to the fact that they don't really understand what it is and they're scared of the unknown. Then it really is a case of just kind of slowly stepping out there. You know, slowly bring interesting things into conversation. Maybe if you're going shopping, point out those nice candles over there. If you go past a shop that sells crystals, maybe ask if you can go in, have a look around. Essentially, you can rip the band-aid off. Of course, that is definitely an option. I personally found that it was good just kind of tiptoeing out just kind of sneak out and just add like a few little bits of information out there just to kind of ease people into it, because I find people are a lot more accepting of something if it's not like shoved in their face straight away. Do you know what I mean? If it's kind of eased into their life. And then just kind of progress from there. And this kind of all ties into another question that I got asked a lot, which is, how did my parents react when they found out that I was a practicing witch? And the answer to that is, don't think they really cared. When I began my magical journey, I was a hidden practitioner. I didn't tell anyone that I was a magical practitioner. I just kind of kept it to myself. But I've always been a little bit odd. I've always liked kind of the weird things in life. And so slowly but surely, I like dipped out of this hidden stage. And I remember setting up my altar and my mum walked in and she laughed at it. And then I packed the altar away. And I never put it back out ever again. Oh, little old me. And then when I started my company, obviously at that point it was very obvious that I was a magical practitioner. But at that point I think they'd already figured it out. And honestly, I don't think they really cared, because I'm fortunate that my family is just generally very accepting of absolutely everyone, which I can thoroughly appreciate, because I am very open and accepting of everyone, and having a family that's like that as well is just even better. Although I know that not everyone is quite as lucky as that. So I would say, if you are planning on making people aware of your magical practice, just do so in a way that's going to keep you the most safe. And sometimes the safest emotional, spiritual, energetic, mental, physical place might be a place where you aren't necessarily open to sharing it with the people, the individuals in your life that are going to be very malicious about it. You know what I mean? Keep yourself safe first is basically what I'm getting at here. And good luck for anyone that's sharing it with other people, because it is a really big step to take, and I'm so proud of you. I wish I could give you a hug, but pandemic. But I wish you all the best, because genuinely it's such a big step to take, and I and a lot of people in the magical community are very proud of you for taking that step if you do decide to do it. So now we have a little bit of a herb question, and this is, can I use kitchen herbs for witchcraft? You definitely can. There are so many herbs that you can find in your kitchen cupboard or in your local supermarket, your local herb supplier. I know that in the UK we have places like Holland and Barrett that just kind of specialise in herbs and health stuff, and there's so much you can do with just bog standard kitchen herbs. So a lot of people like myself will get herbs in bulk, usually because we use a lot of them, and I also run a business, which means I kind of have to get herbs in bulk, otherwise I would be buying a lot of little packets from the supermarket. But that definitely isn't necessary, and you can find almost every herb that you could possibly need in your local supermarket or even in your cupboard right now. Now, I know that in my local supermarket, you can find rose petals in jars that people use in cooking to turn into like candied rose that you put on cakes. You can also find almost every herb and spice under the sun as long as it's edible. And there's so much that you can do with edible herbs. Most of the herbs that you can find in your kitchen cupboard will have multiple different uses. So for instance, rosemary is really good for love, protection, good luck, study, and money. With rosemary, you can do like 5 things, and that's really, really useful to have such multi-purpose herbs really readily available. Now, this is also really, really good if you are a hidden practitioner, because it means that you can basically just go into your supermarket, grab some herbs, say that you want to do some cooking, and poof, magical herbs right there. So dried herbs are always best for this, and that is mostly what you're going to find in your kitchen cupboards. You can also find herbal blends, and if you can figure out what the herbal blends are, fantastic, you can then use them in your magical practice. Tea is also a fantastic thing that you can do. You can find herbal teas, sometimes they're like pure chamomile or they're pure hibiscus. You can cut open the tea bags or use them in tea bags, I suppose, depending on what you're wanting, and then you can use the herbs from those tea bags in your magical practice. You can also use things like coffee. Something so readily available is really, really good for adding extra oomph into the workings, because it obviously is a stimulant. It is fantastic to add extra oomph, extra power into that working, especially if you want to speed it along. So there's so much that you can do with herbs in your kitchen cupboard. So if you are trying to get started or you're not quite sure where to get herbs, supermarkets. Fantastic. I think in America you call them grocery stores. So apologies to anyone that was just exceptionally confused as to what I was talking about. Groceries, supermarkets, same thing. So we have a few questions here that were really, really commonly asked. I actually get them a lot. The first is, what would you recommend for a beginner who's already done the very basic research, such as centering or grounding? Now, this is the point in your magical practice where you can start exploring different paths, different traditions, what it is that you want to go on to practice. Do you find candle magic to be intriguing? Do you want to focus on kitchen witchcraft? Do you like working with herbs? Or is it more spirits that you want to work with? There's so many different paths that you can go down. It's entirely up to you. So this is the point where you can really start exploring, or you can kind of progress further with your basic principles just to kind of take those to a higher level. Now, there are two books that I do really, really like for this, and they are kind of a little bit more advanced than, say, the beginner practices. It kind of develops those to be something more to get into kind of spiritual journeying, spirit work, protection workings, different forms of magical practice that maybe you haven't experienced before, which can be good. Now, of course, when it comes to book recommendations, always do your own research, figure out whether you're interested in the book. Don't just take my word for it, because obviously everyone and every magical practice is going to be completely different. But these are books that I personally really like, but obviously that's just me. So always definitely do your research on whether or not you like a book, but these are two that I really like. The first is Spellcasting Beyond the Basics. This is by Michael Fury, and it is essentially titled The Next Steps to Better Magic. And this is a really good book. I find that it goes into love magic, familiars, out-of-body experiences, scrying, divination. It goes into elemental practice, psychic development, a little bit into healing and defensive workings, a little into astrology, meditation, altered states, and then into fetches, familiars. It also goes into servitors, as well as money magic and the like. So it's a really decent book that goes into a lot of different magical practices, which can be good. Another one that I like is Witchcraft, Theory and Practice. As you can see, my copy is old. This is actually one of the first books that I ever got, and it has all of my old, really badly written little notes in the top here that I've just never taken out, and I probably never will. So this one is a little bit complicated. When I first started, this was probably the most advanced book that I'd ever read, and to this day, it's still quite intense. Now, this does go into a little bit more of an advanced practice. So just reading the back, it goes into omens, fifth fathing, fetches, familiars, glamoring, astral shapeshifting, astral travel, cleansings, banishings, self-rite, self-initiations for anyone that does want to go more into the Wiccan tradition of having a self-initiation. It goes into moon phases, a little bit about shadow working, and just kind of figuring yourself out within the magical practice. It's got a bunch of different kind of exercises in it that you can do. I really enjoyed this book. It is a little intense, so if you struggle with focusing, maybe it's not the best, but it is kind of like a step above basic practices. So it still covers some basic practices, but it kind of takes it above and beyond. And then you can really go on to doing anything. You can focus more on speciality books. I think a lot of beginners, they kind of want books that are beginner, medium, advanced, expert, and they just kind of want a book that just has everything in it, and unfortunately that just isn't the way it is. You can find a lot of beginner books that often are exceptionally simplistic. Once you get beyond that point, it really entirely depends on which path you want to be doing. You know, once you get past the beginner stage, there's whole books that you can get on astral projection. There's entire books on hedge witchcraft, green witchcraft, spirit work, you know, so it's very much then a case of figuring out what you want to practice and what you don't want to practice and kind of going from there. Now, the other question that was probably the most commonly one that I got asked, it's commonly asked on every live stream that I do and in all of my DMs, but especially on here it was really, really common, and that is, do you have to be a certain age, gender, sexuality or religion to practice witchcraft? You definitely don't. This is one of the biggest misconceptions that I see, and it largely comes from media, and sometimes it just comes from misunderstanding. So witchcraft is a craft. It's a magical practice. It's something that you actively do. It's not a religion. So whereas Wicca is a religion, witchcraft is a practice, and so witchcraft is completely secular. It doesn't have a religion attached to it, but you can add religions or deities as you see fit, depending on the magical practitioner. Anyone of any age, gender, personal representation, sexuality, spirituality, anyone can choose to study and practice witchcraft, as long as you are willing to put the time and the effort into reading, researching, and practicing it. It's very much open to everyone. Everyone has the ability to practice witchcraft, but not everyone is willing to or wants to. So if you are interested and you're worried that you can't because you are a man or because you are non-binary, I promise you definitely can. Unfortunately, there are a good few books out there that specify that you have to be a woman, a young woman, a white young woman, and this definitely is not the case. There are so many people around the world that practice witchcraft in one form or another. It really doesn't matter as long as you're willing to put the time and effort into studying and practicing. It really is open to everyone who chooses to do it. So next up, we have quite an interesting question. I had a few questions on cleansings, but this is the one that really caught my eye, and that is, what are the best simple, maintainable spiritual protection practices to keep your home clear? Now this is really good because it kind of combines cleansing and protection in one, which is like one of my favorite things to do. So I would recommend, before you do protections, make sure that you are clearing the house of any energy that you don't want. That applies to personal protections as well. If you're going to be doing something like personal protection, make sure there's nothing latched onto you first, energetically or spiritually, otherwise you're essentially protecting them too. So when it comes to protections of the house, make sure the house is clear first, otherwise you're essentially trapping everything that's in the house in there with you, which honestly I think would be more torturous if it was my house. I think that would probably be the worst possible place for them to be. But of course, that is just me. But if you do want to be doing any kind of protection, cleanse the home first, otherwise everything is just sealed in there with you. There's lots of different cleansing techniques, everything from washes to smoke. I am going to be coming out with a few videos in the future that are kind of updated versions of house cleansings. I'm in the process of editing them, so it shouldn't be too long till those are up. But you can cleanse your house in any way you like. One kind of passive way that's really good for anyone that struggles to stay focused, that maybe doesn't have access to, say, rosemary bundles to cleanse or anything like that, is using salt. So dishes of salt are fantastic to cleanse. Now, of course, it's not going to get everything out, so don't expect it to get like the most ingrained energies and spirits out, because it won't. But as a general, repeated cleansing method that is pretty passive and not particularly time consuming, dishes of salt kept often on windowsills or areas of access into the house, so by front doors, back doors, windows, are fantastic to kind of draw in any of that negative energy as it comes into the space. Every few months you're going to want to dissolve that salt and wash it away to kind of get rid of it and then replace the salt. You can also use stones. I particularly like black tourmaline for this. I put it over door frames, so I don't know if anyone else has door frames that like stick away from the wall. I know some people don't, but mine are like sticking out from the wall, and I will often put a piece of black tourmaline on the top of the door frames, especially those that are of significance, so the one right by the front door mainly. I will put tourmaline on the top to kind of stop any negative energies from getting in, and then you're kind of blocking it and locking it into a room. So essentially you're making it so you only have to repeatedly cleanse one room instead of every room in the house. And then when it comes to protections, I personally recommend wards or objects that contain protective energy that you can leave within the space. So things like witches' balls, witches' bottles, witches' ladders, really, really good for protection. Protection charms with energy added into them are really, really good, or general energy wards that have a battery source or an energy source that's consistent, because then you're not going to have to constantly keep lowering and putting up protections every time it runs out. Instead, it's just a little bit more consistent. So the next question is mainly about my practice. There's actually quite a few that are kind of thrown in here about my practice, but this one is pretty good, and that is, when did you initially know that you were a hearth witch? I had a bunch like this, like would I do more videos on hearth witchcraft? How did I find hearth witchcraft as my path? Now, I initially found hearth witchcraft when I read the book Hearth Witch. Now, I've spoken about it before. I will try to put like a photo on the screen or something of what it looks like. And it's written by Anna Franklin, and I met her at one of the events. I think it might have been Witchfest. No, it wasn't. It was the Staffordshire Pagan Conference. I ended up traveling to that in like 2016, something like that. And Anna Franklin was there, and we got a signed copy of her book. And she's really the first person that really coined the term hearth witch. I know a lot of people tend to group hearth witchcraft and cottage witchcraft into the same category, but from all of my research from the people that practice hearth witchcraft, they are somewhat different. They obviously have similarities, but cottage witchcraft is a little kind of different from hearth witchcraft. And after I read that book, that was it. I was like, this, me. And so from that point on, my practice was mainly considered to be hearth witchcraft. And the reason I kind of resonated with it so much was because it has a little bit more flexibility than a lot of other practices. So the practices that I was in before were like, I was practiced storm witchcraft for a really long time. and I had such wonderful results working with storm witchcraft. It was fantastic. However, living where I live in England, we don't really get many thunderstorms. We mostly just get rain. And so for me, I was finding it was a little too confined. It was too specific. And then I practiced sea witchcraft for a while, and that was good when I lived by the coast, but it's quite difficult when you no longer live by the coast to practice sea witchcraft, so I moved away from that. And then I practiced elemental witchcraft for a while, but I was often finding that I didn't necessarily want to work with the elements all of the time, and I felt a little boxed in. Whereas with hearth witchcraft, because it is witchcraft for the hearth and home, oftentimes it works with hearth deities or energy from the fire or home-based practices. I found it gave me a lot more freedom because I could work with the elements if I wanted to, but I could also work in the kitchen, or I could work with candles, or I could work with cauldrons. Like, it gives me a lot of different options. So if there is a storm coming through, I can work with it and still fall under hearth witchcraft. Like, it's a little bit more flexible. It's kind of like a twist on eclectic. It's eclectic to an extent. But then, you can go beyond hearth witchcraft, but within hearth witchcraft, there's a lot of different practices that you can do, which I really, really like. So we have one here about fairies. Now, I've done a few videos on fairies. The one that I would always recommend people watch is the fairy misconceptions video, because I find that a lot of people who want to work with the fae don't necessarily know what they're getting into. But one of the most common questions that I get is, how can the fae assist us? What is the point of working with the fae? Well, some people will want to connect with the fae mainly because they want to learn more about traditions and cultures of spiritual beings. There are lots of people that I know that work with the fae and actively kind of bring about communication and interactions with them in order to have a better understanding of what they are, who they are as individuals, and their personal lives and experiences as being members of the fae. There are other people who would like a give and take relationship. Oftentimes the fae will work spiritually and energetically where we physically can't travel. So oftentimes, much like working with familiars, a familiar spirit is often used to assist in spiritual planes that we as people, as humans, don't have access to. Even with astral travel, we may not be able to traverse all of the planes, only some of them. So spiritual beings like fae and fetches, and often servitors as well, can often assist us in traversing spiritual planes that we as people can't do. So that's just two of the reasons why a lot of people will choose to work with the fae. But of course, the reasoning behind it is often entirely personal. For some people, it might be a combination of the two. For some, it might just be curiosity or wanting to form that connection. It really all depends. So we have a question here about working with spirits. This one is, what are some things that you need to know before working with spirits? So typically I would recommend figuring out what kind of spirit you're working with. It's really important to know what you want to work with, who you feel comfortable working with, what kind of things you should expect from them. So if you want to work with fae, I would recommend doing some research into the folklore of fae and people's experiences with them. Same with angels, demons, ancestors, those kind of things. See if you can find as much information as you possibly can, and then tentatively dip your toes in once you know how to protect yourself. Protection, banishing, exceptionally important when it comes to working with spirits, because although you might go into it with the best intentions, not intending to get yourself into deep water, it is relatively easy to get yourself into tricky situations because you don't always know who you're dealing with. When it comes to the fae, they are tricksters. Some fae can't lie. I found that some can, so it's really important to take that into consideration. And if you are going to be doing any kind of spirit communication as well, it's really important to remember that some spirits are very happy and willing to lie to you about who they are and what their intentions are. And also, it's really important to not hold spirits to the same morals and ethics that humans have. It's important to remember that although some spirits are human spirits, there are lots of spiritual beings out there that have never been human, and they don't comply with our personal morals. So just like how you might not lie about being someone's dead relative, a spirit that maybe doesn't have the same moral position might not have the same qualms with doing it. So always take care. Make sure you know more than you need to before getting into it, and also make sure that you know how to protect yourself. Next up, we have one about beginner witchcraft books. Now, I am going to have a more comprehensive list on beginner witchcraft books in a video that's going to be coming up relatively soon. Yes, I know that I keep saying it. I am working on it. I just make sure that I reread every book before I talk about it in a video. So if a video is going to have 15 books in it, I have to read 15 books. And when you're reading beginner books, that gets really tedious really quickly. So I'm going to work on the principle that you're after just general modern eclectic witchcraft. I do have some beginner books for more traditional ceremonial witchcraft. That is like a whole different thing. If we're talking a very general beginner book that's very easily accessible, very cheap, that has very little Wicca in it, I would recommend The Door to Witchcraft. Now I'll put a photo of it right here. I don't know what the author is, only because I can't get it up on my phone. It just will not let me do it. But it is a really good book I found so far. It discusses witchcraft as being a secular magical practice, and it does identify that there are differences between Wicca, witchcraft, and paganism. I love it. So I'm not all the way through it yet. I'm most of the way through it. I just have a few pages left at the end, really. But so far, really enjoying it. It's very affordable in comparison to other books, and it is available on Kindle. But as always, when it comes to books, make sure you do your research on a book. Don't just take my word for it that it's going to be the best book known to mankind. Always make sure that it's something that you are interested in. Go off the reviews, go off the blurb, all that kind of stuff. I personally really like it. I think it was a really good kind of no-nonsense book on witchcraft, but it is a very beginner book on witchcraft. So if you're after something a little bit more advanced, that might not be for you. But so far, I'm liking it. Tips on how to stick with witchcraft. So when it comes to this, I'd say the same thing applies to witchcraft as applies to everything else. If you aren't studying something that you enjoy, if you aren't practicing and doing something that you enjoy, it's a lot harder to stick to. That's why exercise for a lot of people is hard to stick to unless you enjoy the type of exercise that you're doing. Because we are kind of programmed to repeatedly do the things that we enjoy and to not want to do the things that we don't enjoy. So if you're struggling to stick with your magical practice because you just feel fed up, you feel stuck in a rut, maybe try shaking it up, finding something that you feel particularly drawn to. Another thing is, don't burn yourself out. I know a lot of beginners often try to do spell work and ritual every single day, and they feel as though they can't be a witch if they don't practice on a daily basis. This is not true. I promise you are still a witch if you only practice when you need to, because that understanding of witchcraft, that energy work, that kind of connection to the spirits and the energies around, that is present in your day-to-day life. That is something that you take with you everywhere, even if you don't actively practice every day. And I've met so many people who've burned themselves out in the magical community because they felt as though every single day had to be packed with magical things. I can promise you my days are not packed with magical things. They are usually packed with editing videos, writing scripts, colour correcting, business stuff, and then occasionally, if I need to, I will be doing some spell work and rituals, maintaining some protections, all of that kind of stuff. Magical practice does not have to be a daily thing, so definitely don't burn yourself out in the process. If you're struggling to stick to it, to stick to studying it, it may well be that it's because you're not enjoying what you're doing. Now, of course, when you get started, it can be a little bit tedious because you are repeatedly doing things and failing and doing them and failing them. But that is all part of learning. No one is going to master meditation on their first try. It's definitely going to take practice. And there's always going to be some things with the magical practice that we find easier than others. So at the very start, it can be a little bit of a long slog to get to that point where you can effectively meditate or do some kind of mind clearing exercise to center, to ground, to energy manipulate, to energy sense, that kind of thing. But I can promise that if you're struggling to get past that point of doing these things repeatedly and it's getting boring and you want to do spell work like now, I can promise it gets so much better once you master those things, and your workings are going to be so much more effective after that point. If you try to do workings when you don't know how workings work and you can't work with your energy, it makes it so much harder. So I'd say find things that you enjoy. If you don't enjoy something, you can always shake it up, research something else, try a different technique, see what works, play about with it, trial and error. A lot of people will work with trial and error to find what works. And oftentimes when you do find something that works for you, it's easy to stick with because you enjoy doing it. Does your craft involve any animist traditions? So I'm not entirely certain on the full entirety of the definition of animism, but for me, I am aware that animism is the belief that everything around us has a spirit, has its own energy, a kind of energy attached to it that some people will call soul or spirit or whatnot. And personally, I have always felt that way. I've always treated things differently than other people. You know, like how kids will just like rip flowers out of the ground, you know, just to like get close to them, and they'll just like tear grass up. I was never that kid. I was always apologizing to like every flower that I picked, every flower that I stood on. I'm still like that today if I go to a cemetery, which I'm weird, so I do quite a lot. I enjoy cemeteries, they're really peaceful. If I am walking like through a section to get to a grave of a family member, for instance, I will always apologize every time I step on someone because it makes me really stressed if I don't. Like it, it's something that I've just always done, and I've kind of drawn that into my magical practice where every flower that I pick, every berry that I take, I will always ask the permission of the plant that I'm taking it from. Every stick that is fallen, I will ask if it wants to be taken, otherwise I will leave it. And that's something I've always taken with me throughout my life. I'm not sure whether that is something that everyone does within witchcraft. I doubt it is, obviously, because witchcraft is so varied, but that's just always been me. So I guess my practice does include aspects of that, yeah, I just don't know if everyone's does. So we have one on candle magic. This is it bad to blow out candles? I've seen a few people on Facebook say it pisses off the spirits. This entirely depends on what kind of candle magic you're doing. And it's one of the biggest issues with social media, especially Facebook. Facebook and Twitter, they are like the most horrible places imaginable online. But you'll often find that people will often push their opinion on candle magic on everyone else. So I have a full video on the 2 main types of candle magic that you will see. I'll list it up here, down in the description box. You know how this goes. But there's 2 main varieties, and depending on the variety and your specific type of candle magic is going to depend on whether you blow out a candle or snuff out a candle. So if you're using a candle as a vessel and you're burning energy down, say every day, and that candle is full of energy, some people consider the act of blowing out that candle to be blowing away the energy that you've put into it. So oftentimes, if you're using a candle as a vessel, you don't blow out the candle, you snuff it out because it helps to contain that energy till the next time you burn it. And as you burn it, you release more and more of that energy until it's burnt out and all of the energy is released. If you are using candle magic to connect with spirits, whether that be elementals, whether that be spirits of ancestors, or just general spirits that are present, it is often considered that blowing out the candle is considered an insult to the spirits that you are working with, specifically if you are working with elementals and the elementals of fire, because obviously you're essentially just going, screw you. You know, that's kind of how it's often taken. But oftentimes people also use candles as an energy focus, and if you're using a candle solely as an energy focus, then there's nothing attached to it that's going to get pissed off if you blow out the candle. Some people will use it for scrying, for meditation. Some people will use it in intention workings where all they're doing is using that flame, that candle, as a way of improving their focus, directing their energy, and manifesting a result. And if that's the way that you're doing it, then you can blow out the candle if you want. You can snuff out the candle. Some people pinch out candles. It really is up to you. So it very, very much depends on what you're using a candle for. And it's one of my main dislikes when it comes to social media and beginner witches, because so often you will have people, especially on Facebook and Twitter and often on Instagram as well, who truly believe that their version of practicing magic is the only way. And so if you don't do things their way, then you're wrong. But realistically, if I use candle magic as a vessel for energy and someone else uses candle magic to work with elementals, then the way we treat the candles is going to be different because we're using them for completely different things, but it falls under the same category. So when it comes to snuffing or blowing out candles, it's entirely up to you and how you personally use candles within your magical practice. So that is the last question that I'm going to be answering today. I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question. I got so many questions, so many more than I thought I would ever get. And I have been sitting here filming for like 2 hours now, and I kind of feel as though I need to stop at some point, especially considering there's already a part 1. So if I have missed your question, I do apologize. I tried to get to as many of the repeated questions as I could. A lot of the single questions unfortunately got a little bit lost because I'm just trying to do as many of the most requested questions as I can. If you would like to come to one of my live Q&As, which I do every single month, follow me on Instagram. I do typically post on there when I'm next going to be doing a Q&A. I'll put it on the screen somewhere. It's somewhere. It's also listed down in the description box. And I do also commonly post on the community tab on YouTube when my next YouTube live is going to be. I have already done the November live. I did it yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Time has no meaning. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to give it a like. It really, really means so much to me. I really love answering you guys' questions because as much as I love doing videos, it's very hard to answer questions, a lot of questions in one video. Usually a video is on one thing. So I really like doing these Q&As. If you did enjoy it, please let me know. If you do have any questions, comments, concerns, video ideas, or just want to chit chat with the community, feel free to post a comment down in the comment section. We also have a Discord server if you would like to join a Magickal community. There's lots and lots of people on there every single day just chatting away about witchcraft. It's a really, really nice place. And if you do enjoy the magical content on this channel in this video, feel free to hit subscribe. I do try my best to post magical content every single week. So I hope you guys are staying safe. I hope you all have a marvelous magical day. A massive thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Your names will be on the end screen in a moment. And I will hopefully see you guys in the next video. Bye!